Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology. I'm Scott here in South Florida, where the weather is starting to turn and it's going to be beautiful for about 6 months. Bob and Dan up in Missouri, where I hear the fall is setting in, and it's kind of nice up there too. We're just coming into that part of the year, which is my favorite part of the year. Okay, we're here today to talk about the 1966 Simon and Garfunkel album, Sounds of Silence. Just to give a quick background on it, this was Simon and Garfunkel's second album, recorded in mostly in 1965. One song was recorded in March of 1964, but most of this was recorded in 1965, released in January 1966. It's a rather short album, 29 minutes long, produced by Bob Johnston and Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson, who got around in those days. Singles that we all remember from that album are The Sound of Silence, as opposed to the album title, which is Sounds of Silence. But anyway, singles are The Sound of Silence, released in September 1965, Homeward Bound, released in February 1966, and I Am a Rock, released in May of 1966. Bob, you're the guy who wanted to talk about this album, so take it away, brother.
All righty. Okay, I want to warn everybody, I'm not going to review this album necessarily, because what can you say about Simon and Garfunkel that hasn't already been said? This is going to be deeply personal to me. I want to talk about two songs on this album that have great meaning to me. You know, if you came of age in the 60s or 70s, you know the song Sound of Silence. It was all over the place. So what I want to talk about is my first, other than listening to the song and hearing it, one of my personal exposures to it came in the early 70s. Some buddies and I took a road trip up to Mountain Home, Arkansas to go to the Ozark Folk Festival. And we spent the weekend hanging out at the campground and the campfires where these impromptu jam sessions would break out. And you'd have Ozark people in their overalls doing their traditional Appalachian music, joined by young long hairs who found a common ground with music. And at one of these jam sessions, this long hair in a poncho came up and did an a cappella version of Sound of Silence. And you could see the looks on some of the older generation's faces that, they don't quite knew what to make of this. But anyway, he finished the song, and he's standing next to a guy in overalls who looks like he just came out of the Ozark Mountains. And the hippie pulls a beer out from under his poncho, pops the top on it, hands it to the guy in the overalls, and they stand there and share a beer and are having a great time over the song and the sharing of it. And I thought that was such a great moment to see. Anyway, that was one of my early remembrances of this song and how I saw those generations come together. But later in life, this song took on an entirely new meaning to me. And that's what I really want to talk about. And I've got a video clip that I'd like for Scott to play right now that I want to introduce into this new meaning of the song. So. That was video shot right after the collapse of the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. And what you're seeing there is a videographer kind of stumbling through the streets amidst all of the dust and debris floating through the air. And if you listen very carefully, you will hear chirping sounds in the background. And what that is, those are the personal safety alarms from firefighters. They're called PASS alarms, Passive Alert Safety System. And those are activated when a firefighter is immobile. And if you don't move for 30 seconds, it starts to do a little beeping sound, warning you that, hey, this thing is going to go off.
Let me play it again now. Now that we know what we're looking at, let me play it again so we know what to look for, okay?
Okay. So anyway, with these pass alarms, if you're immobile for a certain amount of time, they start going off. And they don't stop until either the battery runs down or they're manually reset. And it's a way that if a firefighter is lost or trapped or whatever, and rescuers are coming for him, they can try to follow the sounds to find the firefighter. I am a retired firefighter paramedic. I was on duty on 9/11, and I watched all of this happen from my firehouse. And when that video and some others like that came out, and I heard those chirping sounds, I knew what it was. I knew it was firefighters who were either dead or unconscious or whatever. And it just, obviously, it said a lot to me. Well, fast forward to 2015, and there was a hard rock band called Disturbed that did a cover version of Sounds of Silence. And somebody took their version of that song and overlaid it on images from 9/11. So Disturbed's version of Sound of Silence became connected to 9/11. And when I saw that video and I heard Disturbed's version, I flashed back to that video that I had seen in 2001 of those chirping pass alarms going off amidst all of that debris where you couldn't see anything. And it just, I hit on, the sound of silence and the darkness. And that song now has just an entirely new meaning to me, because every time I hear it, I think about the loss of 343 brother firefighters that day. And, 9/11 was my generation's Pearl Harbor. And I will go to the grave remembering that day. I remember everything that happened that day. I remember who I was on duty with. I remember watching those fires and turning to the guys on my crew and saying, FDNY is going to lose people. I mean, you can't have a fire that big without losing people. Of course, none of us knew that it was going to be to that extent. And I can remember we ran an ambulance call that morning in the middle of all of this. And I was in the back of the ambulance with the other paramedic taking the patient. And Dave Wilson, who was driving the ambulance, called back and said, hey, man, one of the towers just went down. And we got to the hospital and we're in the EMS room, watching it on TV of the towers and stuff coming down. So deep, deep personal thing now to me what that song means. And it's totally different from what it said to me back, in the 70s. So that's my personal thing to one of those songs. The other song on that album is I Am a Rock. And I grew up in the country, lived on a farm, did not move into the city until I was 11 years old. So I grew up on my own, no other kids around, no Little League, no Pop Warner football, no Boy Scouts, none of that kind of stuff. So I moved in and started 6th grade in the city, and I'm going to school with kids that have grown up together in the neighborhood, and they did all this stuff. And I was the big chubby kid, and there's a picture of me from 6th grade on the schoolboy patrol where I'm just towering above everybody else. And so, I had a tough time fitting in, and especially with sports. And, all of the kids were into baseball, and the Cardinals in St. Louis were big that time. And I even went out and bought, remember the Topps baseball cards you could get? I went out and bought those, and tried to show the kids my baseball cards. But, I didn't know if I bought a loser of a card or whatever. Anyway, but then I went to junior high school. And my 2 years of junior high school were the 2 worst years of my life. And it's centered around PE class. And you can be a junior Einstein, but if you go into PE and you have no athletic abilities, you are lower than pond scum. And there's nothing more humiliating than having the coach pick his 2 favorites for team captains, and then they start picking people for their teams, and you're going to be the last one picked. And I couldn't run and dribble a basketball at the same time. I just, was a big, clumsy, fat kid. And I remember the coach pulling me and a couple other athletic losers out and making us go to the side of the gym and do our own exercises, to toughen us up. And if we did like basketball, we'd break into shirts and skins, and I would pray to whatever gods I knew, don't let me be a skin, don't let me be a skin. Of course, I'd wind up being a skin. I hated PE. I tried to do anything I could to get out of it. And that carried into my freshman year in high school. But by then, I started kind of filling out, and I was no longer a fat kid. I was just a big size kid. In fact, the football coaches even tried to recruit me. But in high school, we had so many students that they couldn't do full-time PE. So you would do like a quarter in PE and then a quarter of homeroom and stuff. So it got better. But those 2 to 3 years were miserable. I hated it, and I hated it, and I hated it, and I hated who I was. And I was the kid that loved to read, so I buried myself in books, and when school was over, I'd go home and I'd read. And, so I've always had a love of reading, but I just immersed myself in books and didn't do much of anything else. And when I heard I Am a Rock, which is Simon's song about, isolating yourself from other people, there was a line in that song, I have my books and my poetry to protect me. And it just resonated with who I was at that period in my life and how I sought refuge in books. And I remember there was a series of books about a character named Tom Swift, who was just the perfect kid who could do anything and everything. And I immersed myself thinking I was him. And I even read a whole series of books about kids doing sports like car racing and football and stuff. And I imagined that I could be one of those kids. When I heard that song, I just said, my God, that's me. There are other people out there who feel the same way. And, I came out of my shell to a certain degree, but, those experiences from that time I know still impact me. And, there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. And I've always been comfortable being alone. Give me a cup of coffee and a book and leave me alone and I'm happy. But anyway, those 2 songs have deep personal meanings to me. And I think that it serves as a highlight of Paul Simon's ability as a songwriter. And I think that he ranks as one of the greatest songwriters of that classic rock era, right up there with Bob Dylan and so many others. And there were some other songs on the album that, I think it's a little kind of mediocre, but those 2 songs just so resonate with me. And that's what I wanted to share. Pardon me for getting so personal, but I wanted to use it as an illustration of what music can mean to you, and how some things just are a 3-minute encapsulation of your life.
Okay. Welcome to another edition of Bob's Couch.
I'm sorry I couldn't think of anything.
That's all right, man. Thanks for sharing that stuff. D, do you know this album? Have you listened to this album?
Oh, the Simon and Garfunkel album.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You want to give us a quick
my quick take on it is it's hard to find fault with it. I mean, there's some just tremendous songs on here. They, of course, Sound of Silence, cultural musical touchstone. Kathy's song, that's a strong. This album is really personal. It deals with those issues of alienation, loneliness. And I think, I don't think there's a weak song on the album. They go from, classic all the way down to, I would say, a strong medium. But I think what's interesting musically, even though Simon and Garfunkel came up as folk, this album is pretty fleshed out with percussion, bass, and some keyboards, which I think made it a lot more approachable to a wider audience. In fact, the little story I came across with the Sounds of Silence, which was originally released on the Wednesday morning at Wednesday 3 a.m. album, was it didn't do very well.
No, it
In
tanked.
fact, yeah, the sales were very disappointing. Simon wasn't too happy by it. Then he went off to England to play in pubs over there. And Tom Wilson, the producer, he went off and heard there was some radio stations in Boston and down in Florida, Cocoa Beach, and it was really popular with college students. So he thought, well, let's do something with this. So Tom Wilson went back, remixed it, got some studio musicians in there, bass player, drums, some keyboards, and he did this without checking with Paul Simon. But then sales started to take off. Requests came in from radio stations. And when it reached #1, Simon was overseas. Either he was still in England or he was touring somewhere else, playing pubs and coffee houses in Europe. And Art Garfunkel sent him a message. He goes, "Hey, they're really starting to buy that Sound of Silence." He goes, it looks promising. So anyway, that was the little backstory with Sound of Silence, which I think it makes it more powerful than just, two guys singing on an acoustic guitar. The whole album, if you're a folk rock fan, this is the creme de la creme. I think it really does typify the period. And I have to be in the mood to listen to it. I Am a Rock, Kathy's song, that's about a girl that he met when he was in England. She worked at one of the pubs that he was playing at and had quite a romance with her. And but yeah, if I'm feeling rather frazzled and need to get back to it, I think this album is one of those albums to do that. And it does speak well to what Bob said, sort of adolescent angst. And it's good to know there's somebody else out there that's experiencing things that you're experiencing. You feel like, hey, I'm not really an island. There is somebody else. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, that explains the Tom Wilson production credit on this album, because I'm just looking deeper as you're talking about that. And it makes sense now, because the album was actually, it's produced by Bob Johnston. All Tom Wilson did was he took the basic track of The Sound of Silence, which had appeared on the previous on their debut album, and then did some overdubs on it, and then it became a hit. As you explained, that's the only thing that Tom Wilson did on this. Everything else was done by Bob Johnston, apparently. This was, and a lot of this will explain why. I thought it was kind of fun, because remember when we talked about, it used to be that successful acts would throw out an album, would throw out like 3 or 4 albums every couple of years, as opposed to today when they come out only every 4 or 5 years. Well, my quick look at this discography, their debut, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., came out in 1964, and it was 2 years later before this one came out to follow up, and which is very, very unusual for how things were done back in those days. And so I guess that kind of explains that, because the first album was a flop, and it looks like Simon and Garfunkel actually went their separate ways, and Simon went and wrote a bunch of these songs and actually recorded an album in England called I lost it here, but he recorded an album by himself in England that was only released in England. But a lot of these songs that are on this album were on that Paul Simon solo album. And then I guess that was all the stuff was recycled then as a Simon and Garfunkel album after the reworked version of The Sounds of Silence became a hit. And so Simon and Garfunkel became a working act again. Yeah. After they had bombed with their first album.
Yeah.
Apparently,
it's my understanding that Paul Simon solo album that he did in England was acoustic. And
right.
So when
it was called the Paul Simon Songbook was the title of that album.
Yeah, and so when the revamped Sound of Silence hit, and he came back to the U.S.,
Right.
Some of the songs that he brought back with him, they up tempoed them, and did the same kind of thing. And it's my understanding also that Paul Simon did not like the rock version of Sound of Silence, but you can't argue with success.
Well,
So there's a very good possibility that if this producer and engineer had not doctored Sound of Silence, there never would have been a Simon and Garfunkel.
Right. He might not have had a career.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And I know,
So sometimes the musician isn't always right. Sometimes you have to listen to the record company honchos.
Exactly.
And that's what this was on. What label was this? I've lost that. It was Columbia. It was Columbia Records, and Tom Wilson was a staff producer for Columbia Records at the time.
And then Sound of Silence was everywhere after that. It was in the movie The Graduate, and it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And so if you're a child of the '60s, you know that song. And
all three of these singles. I mean, I know. All three of these singles are, I mean, they have legs. I mean, they become classics. Everybody, most everybody knows these three songs. And they ended up having a very, very successful career, as we all know. Goosed a few years later by their participation in the soundtrack of the movie The Graduate, and they even reached even better heights over the course of the years than that. So they had a great career because Tom Wilson had a vision for an old toss away song, right?
Well, I think it was interesting that they, were getting these reports that it was a lot of the radio stations around Boston, in particular, the college students around that area. And then for some reason, Cocoa Beach, Florida, there was this, they'd call into the radio station and he responded to that. So I think it was, propitious series of events.
And then there's also some interesting backgrounds to the song that come from Garfunkel and Simon, and they have differing versions. And Simon claims that he wrote the song in his bathroom, and that he would go in there and shut the door and do a lot of stuff in the dark because I guess he liked the sound and he liked the going off by himself and things, and that's where the Hollow of Darkness, My Old Friend comes from. Garfunkel's story is that he had a friend in college who went blind all of a sudden, and Garfunkel was helping this friend, and Garfunkel claims that he nicknamed himself Darkness, with his friend, and that Garfunkel claims that's where the Hollow Darkness, My Old Friend comes from. And in fact, the story goes that this blind friend of Garfunkel's actually went on to have a pretty good career in his chosen field, and he loaned Simon and Garfunkel the money to record their first album, Wednesday Morning 9 a.m. And it was like, I guess
Wednesday morning 3 a.m.
Wednesday morning 3 a.m.
That was the middle of the night, not early morning.
And anyway, that he loaned them the $400 to record the album. Of course, then like Dan said, it tanked, and they went their separate ways, and then got back together after the revamped Sound of Silence became a big hit.
Simon and Garfunkel, they haven't seen eye to eye on a lot of things over the years. They always keep coming up with competing stories. No, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This is the way it happened. They always go back and forth on stories like this, it seems like. Wednesday morning 3 a.m. Well, I mean, it was okay. I mean, it sold a few copies. It got to number 30, but I don't know why they thought it was such a bomb, because it actually did something. Sounds of Silence got to 21. Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme in 1966 hit number 4. And then their last two albums, Bookends in 1968, Bridge Over Troubled Water in 1970, both topped the charts, got to number 1. Uh, yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my sister was a big fan of Bridge Over Troubled Water. Yeah, I've never known much about them. I've just known the songs that have endured, but I never knew too much about them. I did listen to this album a couple times for the first time in my life. Like, not my cup of tea, as they say.
Too normal for you, Scott?
Oh, it's too boring.
Well, in counterpoint to that, I would highly recommend you listening to Disturbed. They're a heavy metal music group, and they did a version that was released in 2015. I wasn't aware of it at all, so my wife mentioned it to me about, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I thought, what is that? And then I listened to it. It is a very powerful hard rock interpretation.
But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the wells of silence.
You know, and like I said earlier, you know, I had heard Disturbed's cover version, but it wasn't until I saw it coupled with that 9/11 tribute that it just totally changed my perception of the song. You know, when I heard those pass alarms going off in the darkness, you know, and the obscurity of all the dust and debris. And yeah, the Disturbed's version is actually really good, and it brings a new element to that song. And you know, even though the song's lyrics kind of deal with some strong topics, you know, Simon and Garfunkel's version was still kind of on the lighter side. Disturbed takes it to a new level.
I've heard of 2 or 3 of Paul Simon's solo albums over the years, especially Graceland. I really like Graceland. I like stuff he did as a solo, but yeah, the old Simon and Garfunkel stuff just hasn't grabbed me. It just, whatever. That's just me. I know a lot of people love this stuff, but that's just me. Just too quiet, understated for my taste. I see these old folky coffee shop, open mic poetry reading sort of stuff. And it's like, that's just skeevy.
Yeah. Scott,
it's the words, man. It's the words.
So I can't get to the words. I can't find anything that grabs my attention.
Well, it's the opposite for me. They just really resonate with me.
When the group Disturbed performed their version of Sounds of Silence on Conan's show, Paul Simon caught that, and he sent a note back to the lead singer, whose name is David Dryman. And for the most part, he said he liked it. Simon wrote him an email. He said, really powerful performance on Conan the other night. First time I'd seen you do it live. Nice, thanks. And that was it. So Simon's being very brief with his compliments. So anyway,
okay, that's good. It also adds the value of that publishing rights to the song. So there you go. There you have it.
Yeah. And brings it to a new generation.
Exactly. Okay. Well, there you have it. There's our take on the Sounds of Silence. Actually, not the Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, the album. Marissa's going to join us next week to have a discussion of one of her favorite artists named Ben Howard, who, as far as I know, neither Bob nor Dee nor I know Ben Howard, but we'll do our homework this week and we'll come back and talk to Marissa about it. So join us for that, and then we have a few more interesting things coming up over the next couple of weeks. So check us out. Give us a like, subscribe to our channel so you know whenever we post a new video. And thanks for joining us, everybody. So long.